morning, everyone, and welcome to the first of 4 webinars about my upcoming book called The Outstanding Organization. The book is divided into 4 parts, and so today's webinar will focus on the first part, which is the power of clarity. So before we get going, for those of you who've been on before, you know I like to start with making sure you can hear me. So if you could raise your hand, please, and let me know that I'm coming through loud and clear, I'd appreciate it. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. It's always a little bit of a mystery, kind of like the wizard behind the screen. So thank you very much. I'm taking everyone's hands down now. All right. Well, this is very exciting. I've been, holed up in my office for the better part of a year writing this book, and I can finally start talking about it. It's going to be out in July, so it's not quite out yet, but I'd love to tell you some of the things that I discovered as I was doing research and thinking through, and a little bit about what even propelled me to write the book, and then we'll get quickly into the first topic, which is clarity. So for those of you who may not be familiar with this, that are newcomers, there are 2 different windows that you should be concerned with. One is the viewer window and one's the control panel. And if you can't see your control panel, it may be minimized, and so you may need to, oops, I'm sorry. You may need to just maximize your control panel so you can see it. And if you are using a microphone and speakers to listen, and if you want to ask a question verbally, then just please make sure you've got a microphone hooked up so you can ask that later on, or you can type in the question as well. And if you're using a telephone, make sure you've put in an audio pin. It's a number right here on your control panel so that you can hear everyone and we can hear you if you decide to ask a question verbally. We're going to take questions at the very end. You can go ahead and type them in as you have questions, but I'll wait until the end, so about 15 minutes of Q&A. This is only an hour-long webinar. I know most of you know that they're an hour and a half if you're a regular, but today's is only going to be an hour, so I'll talk for 45 minutes, and then we'll take Q&A. And if you raise your hand in the Q&A session, then I'll know I can go ahead and unmute you, and you can ask your question verbally. So for those of you who might be new, a little bit about myself. I've been in business for 19 years now, and I am considered to be a bit of a thought leader in applying lean to the service sector. I was one of the first in the country to specialize solely in applying lean in the service sector and office areas within manufacturing. And my client list right now contains both manufacturing and healthcare, financial services, energy, law enforcement, government, just kind of in and out of distribution, and a couple of other industries as well. So I teach at the University of California, San Diego's Lean Enterprise program. We offer it once every other semester, and then I also travel extensively to client locations and speak. And there are a couple ways you can reach me. 3 books that I've got out now, co-authored the first 2 with Mike Osterling, and they're available through Productivity Press or on Amazon or any of the other booksellers. And then my new one, which is available for pre-order, The Outstanding Organization, as I mentioned, will be out in July. So we have 3 more webinars after today coming up on April 5th, May 3rd, and May 17th that will complete the cycle of talking about some of the topics in the book. And so I'm hoping you'll be able to join us for those 3 as well. So what propelled me to write this book? Well, I've been at the operations management and improvement game, I guess we could call it, for a long time, over 20 years. And throughout my whole 20 years, there's been something nagging at me that has actually gotten more it's been nagging at me more in recent years than it was earlier in my career, and that's this thought that we've had all these great business books and all of these wonderful improvement methodologies come and in some cases go, and yet businesses don't seem to be performing in a fundamentally better way today than they were 20, 25, 30 years ago. So I discovered this article in The Economist in 2001 that said that of all these executives that were surveyed, that 17% of them said that the change management programs and improvement programs they attempted, 17% of them said it had absolutely no impact whatsoever. And 63% said that there was temporary improvement and they had some temporary gains, and 20%, only 20% said that there was anything lasting in what they attempted. So I'm thinking, there's something wrong with what we're doing that those numbers aren't any more attractive than they are. 10 years later, Accenture did a similar study. They also surveyed executives, and they found that 69% of the executives said that their improvement programs needed a complete reevaluation, restart, or makeover. And that's a sobering number. If you're in the professional arena as a leader or as an improvement professional, either one of them, this number is not a good number for us. We need to get that number down significantly. So the financial impact at 58%, that's also a problem, because after all, businesses are in business to make money. Now, not-for-profits and government organizations are not necessarily in business to make money, but they certainly are in business to make enough money to keep reinvesting in the business so you can get better equipment, better talent, all of those things that it takes to run a business. So just because it's not-for-profit or government doesn't mean that money doesn't matter. It matters tremendously. So that's a sobering number. And then this 33% of mixed to disappointing results, that's just way too high of a number for us to be seeing decades after we've been at this. So let's take another look at this. That's the executive viewpoint. Now let's look at something a little more dire, which is that in '99, so over 10 years ago, the landmark report To Err Is Human came out from the Institute of Medicine that said that up to 98,000 deaths occurred every year due to medical errors in hospitals. And it was the 8th leading cause at that time of death in the U.S. So the survey showed it was about 44,000 to 98,000, depending on how you sliced and diced the data. Now, you might wonder, why are we talking about airplanes when we're talking about medical errors? Well, this is a typical Southwest Boeing 737, and because Southwest has standardized so much, every Boeing 737 more or less has 137 passenger seats. So if we look at that 44 to 98,000 people dying from medical errors every year, it would take this many Boeing 737s in the Southwest fleet, fully loaded with passengers, crashing in 1 year, killing everyone on board, to equal that number. Can you imagine what would happen in the United States if we had this many plane crashes in a single year? This was a very sobering report. It was in 1999. There was a bit of a rallying cry around that report, and it got some media attention for a while. So we should have some really good news now that we're over a decade later, right? They did set an improvement goal, and it said in 5 years, from 1999 forward, in 5 years they wanted to reduce that number of lives lost by 50%. Did we reach it? Not even close. In fact, what we're hearing is that starting in '05, which was the 5-year mark, JAMA, the Journal of American Medical Association, said progress has been slow. And then Hearst newspapers did a investigative report that said that the death toll is actually closer to 200,000, not 98,000. And then in 2010, the OIG, Office of Inspector General of the Department of Health and Human Services, said that there are 180,000 Medicare patients dying annually from medical errors, just Medicare patients, not commercial patients. And then in 2010, same year, New England Journal of Medicine said there was no significant change. And in 2011, Health Affairs reported that 33% of hospitalized patients are harmed, and 7% of those result in permanent injury or death. So something is wrong. We're over a decade later, and the numbers are looking worse, not better. So I started thinking more. What is it? We've had all of these incredible, really well-founded methodologies come and in some cases go, starting with JIT and TOC, theory of constraints, and then re-engineering and TQM, and then Lean and Six Sigma and Lean Six Sigma and CQI, continuous quality improvement in healthcare. All these methodologies by themselves are actually very solid methodologies. Something's missing from the equation, and this is what got me thinking, for years, what is it? So over the years, we've heard it's leadership, we've heard it's culture. Well, it is that, but I decided that I am not going to accept the hypothesis that it's all about leadership. Because if it's all about leadership, we are doomed. The reality is there are not that many stellar leaders out there. It's a bell-shaped curve just like any professional group, and you've got a small number of stellar leaders on one end, a small number of absolute disasters on the other end, and then everything in the middle. So if we're relying on stellar leaders to be the things that will make organizations finally perform to the degree that we can and should be, we're doomed, as I said. So that can't be it. I refuse to believe that. So I started thinking about one of the things that we have to do is just improve the way we improve. Like right now, there's a nice movement going on with some great solid research on learning how we learn. So we're in this bit of a wave right now where we're learning how to learn and we're learning how to learn better. I think we need to improve how we improve. And this is why I wrote the book, because I'm trying to get out there what it is that we're not doing well with improvement that we need to shift. So I went to what I consider to be the absolute fundamentals. Doesn't matter what leader you've got on board. At the fundamental level, we've got mindsets and behaviors that are the core of how an organization performs. And if those mindsets and behaviors aren't the types of mindsets and behaviors that will achieve excellence, then we're going to have a cracked foundation and we're not going to be able to build a solid house on it. So if you look at excellence in any endeavor, whether it's sports, music, science, any art, acting, any of these excellent endeavors that people excel at, there are very core mindsets and behaviors at play, and they're all exactly the same. And that's when I started looking at these commonalities to see how much business had of those mindsets and behaviors and how much they did not. And I found that in many cases, businesses were lacking in these mindsets and behaviors. And because of that lack, it creates this low to moderate to extreme, in some cases, levels of chaos within organizations. And chaos is something that we do have to contend with. It is the reality of what our world is like these days. There's a lot of external factors that come into play that kind of hit us out of left field. So what we need to do is find ways to manage the chaos that we can control and not self-inflict it into our organizations and on ourselves. So there's the chaos we can control, there's the chaos we can't control. What we need to do is grab and get our arms around the chaos we can control. So I discovered that there were 4 reasons why we don't have our arms around chaos. It's lack of clarity in organizations, lack of focus, lack of discipline, and lack of engagement. And again, I'm not suggesting that all organizations are missing this in 100% vein. It's that most organizations are lacking some level of these in various degrees. So what my theory, my hypothesis has been, and it's been proven out, that if we build clarity, focus, discipline, and engagement into the foundation of the organization, what we're able to achieve are the core capabilities that are the things that businesses need to be highly successful and become outstanding. And that is having very strong capabilities in problem solving and continuously improving and in resilience to weather the storms that inevitably come our way. So what we're going to focus on today is clarity. So let's talk about how clarity, what it looks like in an organization and what the lack of it looks like, and then what to do about that. One of the earlier discoveries I had is that clarity is extremely closely linked to the truth. So when you think about getting clarity in your personal life, oftentimes it's really about moving away from the confusion and maybe in conversation the words that are spoken that aren't really reflective of what people mean, and moving to mean what you say what you mean and mean what you say and all those things. If you look at something very different, look at kitchen design right now. I happen to be looking at some possible changes to my kitchen. And in kitchen design right now, many people are taking cabinet doors off or they're putting glass doors in so that there's clarity into what's going on. If you look at visual management and how visual management is a large part of the lean tool set and philosophy and management style, that's a matter of getting the truth so that it can be very clearly understood by everyone. So it's really about telling the truth. So one of my my goals is to help organizations become more truth-seeking and truth-telling so that problems are more easily uncovered and solved, and there's much more honesty and directness in how we go about solving that. What we actually have in most organizations is a whole lot of people running around in a bit of a fog. And this isn't about the people. It's about the system and about the behaviors that the system is promoting and honoring over the behaviors that are actually the things that we need to build. So what this widespread fog creates a widespread level of ambiguity. And what is a bit shocking to me is that, for example, one thing I discovered as I was doing more and more research, both with my own clients and with other organizations, is that there's this growing trend to load up job descriptions when people are being recruited for new positions to say something like, needs to have comfort with ambiguity, needs to be able to deal with high degrees of ambiguity. And this is becoming actually shockingly common. And I think it's just wrong. I don't believe that people should be coming into organizations just accepting, shrugging their shoulders and saying, oh, well, that's the way it is, regarding ambiguity. I think it's absolutely the wrong direction we should be going in. What we should be doing is seeking clarity in everything we do so that we can reduce the degree of ambiguity, not getting people used to it. It's like get used to multitasking because it's just the way it is. No, 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 no. We need to get rid of the need to multitask so that we can be more effective. So when you look across an organization, and obviously we're not going to cover anywhere near all of these in a 1-hour webinar, but there are so many different areas where there is self-inflicted ambiguity. So things like organization purpose and vision. What's the organization really trying to achieve? There's a widespread ambiguity in all the organizations I've worked with, and then even in public workshops and things like that where I talk with people where I'm not internal in the organization, most people don't have as clear of an understanding of what the organization's trying to achieve as they should. And the lower you go in the organization, the more that ambiguity exists. And any leader who suggests that someone on the front lines doesn't really need to know, they should just come in and do their job, of course, is the kind of leader that's not going to be able to fully engage employees, and they're not going to be able to perform well as a business if they don't have every single person aligned around vision. Customers and products, I am going to talk about this in a minute, so I'll skip that for right now. Business goals and priorities, we're going to cover very heavily in the discipline webinar. So getting clear about what are the priorities that we should be working on right now so you don't have different functional areas working at cross purposes, or worse, a shared resource such as IT getting dumped on from everyone trying to get their project through when in reality someone needs to set priorities to relieve IT of that burden. Policies and procedures, I just am coming off of 2 weeks in a row of working very intensely on site with 2 clients where we spent, I would say, 50% of our time getting alignment and clarity around what policies really are and what they aren't, what leadership's intent is and isn't, and how work should be done or should not be done. It was fascinating to be coming off the heels of a book and get dumped right into a high degree of ambiguity in 2 different organizations around these areas. Roles and responsibilities, I'm not going to cover till the engagement webinar. So if people aren't very clear about what they should be doing, that creates an awful lot of uncertainty. And uncertainty tends to create a lack of confidence. And lack of confidence tends to produce lack of competence. So if we want people to be competent and able to perform at high levels, they have to have a high degree of confidence on what they're doing and why they're doing it. And then that, of course, creates that higher degree of certainty in an organization. So even an organization like W.L. Gore that doesn't have a structured org chart, it's a very flat organization, people are still very clear on what they're working on at any given time. So you don't have to put in a lot of structure in order to get this, but you have to put clear communication and clarity around what people are working on and why. Process performance, we'll talk about much more in the discipline section. Problem solving and decision making, also in discipline, but I will touch on that today. And then finally, communication. just simply the words we choose to use can create an awful lot of ambiguity, and it's very quick to be able to get clarity by changing some of the words we use. So let's start with one of the ones I am going to talk about today, which is the customer piece of it. I'm always amazed at how many people I work with in my client base when I work with teams for improvement don't really know who the organization's customers are. They may be able to name one or two large organizations that are their customers, but they don't really understand the classification of the customer, and they certainly don't understand what the customer is really buying. And so even again, if you're a not-for-profit organization, you have to understand what the expectations are of the customer. And I argue that it's not about the products or goods that you're providing, that any organization is providing. It's about what customer problem you're solving. So if you can start talking about this in the next meeting you're in the next improvement session you're in, next team-based activity you're in, start talking about what you do as an organization in problem terms. What problem are you solving for your customer? Once you get clarity across a critical mass of people in the organization about what the problem is you're solving, suddenly all of the decision making and all of the prioritization and all of the activity starts aligning around that, because up until then, until you get clear on the problem, people are often very unsure of what you're really even doing. So let's take an example and look at some customers or companies that most of you know. These are all consumer good organizations. So let's take Hallmark Cards. When I ask people, well, what does Hallmark Cards produce? They say cards. I'm like, true, that is very true. They manufacture cards. But what are they really selling? It's not a physical card that they're selling. So when I ask live audiences this, there'll be a couple people that'll get close to it, and the answer is you're selling the means for people to express an emotion. You're selling a means for people to express an emotion. So this is the problem, and it's not necessarily a big problem, but this is the problem we're solving with a card. We're solving the problem where someone wants to express a feeling, and they may or may not feel comfortable doing it directly, and so they're buying a card to do that. Let's take another example. Garmin, GPS devices. When you think about Garmin, the first thing you think about is, well, they produce the device. They do indeed produce a device, but that's not the problem they're solving. They're solving a problem where someone is wanting to not get lost. And if you peel back the layers of the onion more deeply, they're solving peace of mind. They're creating peace of mind through solving a problem where someone might be insecure or lack confidence in where they are. So if you'll notice, both of these products now have an emotional tie to the problem that they're solving for the customer. And again, if people get clear across the organization about what it is, that problem that they're solving from an emotional level, and not all companies produce a product that has an emotional component, but for these two, they do. Let's look at the third one. Toyota, or any car manufacturer for that matter. They're not producing cars. That's what they're producing on the surface. What they're producing, if you peel back the layers of the onion, is the means to get from point A to point B. And if you peel back the layers of the onion even further, they're producing the means to get from point A to point B in a safe and, in some cases, inexpensive and high-quality way. So they want to be able to efficiently get from point A to point B without it costing them a lot and without any undue risk or concern. So it's the transportation mode, again, has an emotional tie to it that we want to feel safe and secure. And so if you look at all consumer goods, almost all of them are about solving some sort of an emotional need. Now, when you get into the non-consumer goods businesses that provide business-to-business services, then we get into trying to solve the problem of making that business become more successful. So again, I've taken teams into their customers' environments, not literally, but emotionally or mentally, into their customer environments. And even seasoned leaders and even seasoned improvement professionals sometimes don't really fully grasp what exactly their product or service, their good or service is doing for their customer. And when you start thinking about it in those terms, for example, a refrigeration client that I have, now, a lot of the people initially knew that what they were doing is keeping refrigeration up in a grocery store, for example, but really very few of them had fully connected the dots on what happens if suddenly a refrigeration unit goes down and all that food is starting to spoil, and what that means for their customer, and then what it means for the customer who goes there panicking, rushing home to make dinner, or running out to get a last-minute thing that they forgot, and they get to the store and it's not available, and all the implications. So if you can, again, get everyone in the organization to become very clear on what problem you're solving for a customer, then you're much better able to align improvement around that. And you won't have this feeling that many improvement professionals do now, where you're kind of running in amok and in cross purposes and no one really knows exactly what we're trying to do. The other thing I would argue is that you really need to indoctrinate all new hires into these things that we've been talking about. All new hires need to understand who the customers are and what they value. But in reality, most orientation programs, if you can even call them that, are much more about benefits than they are about the organization. And so in the book, and toward the end, and I'll talk about this again in the engagement webinar, I have a whole list of things that I find missing in most orientation programs that to me are far more fundamental than some of the things that are always covered in orientation programs. So think about this, talk with your HR department, start building in a little bit of information for all your new hires. And then, of course, once you get clarity around this, you do want to roll this out and inform the rest of your workforce who, in many cases have been on board for teens and 20 years or more. The next thing I want to talk about just very quickly is improvement strategy. So this I'm going to get much more into when we talk about focus, which is the next webinar, but I want to just put it out there that what I find in most organizations when I walk in is there is virtually no strategy. So when you have pockets of green belts, black belts, lean champions, whatever, and the larger the organization, the worse this gets actually, you can end up having people either stepping over each other, bumping into each other, or leaving a huge gap that isn't being addressed because there's not an overall strategy. So getting clarity around what strategy you have, even at a local level, is absolutely critical. So let's say that you feel like you have no ability to influence leaders into creating a widespread company-wide strategy, which is ideal. Let's say you don't have that leverage or you don't feel like you do. So you can still take it at a local level. You can still get a firm strategy that everyone agrees with and is clearly communicated to a division level, a department level, even a work team level. You can create strategy at any level of the organization, and so I recommend you do that tomorrow. Start talking about what is your strategy and get alignment around it. What are you trying to achieve? So you see a big 1 on your screen. What do you think 1 means? We're moving into another topic here. So 1 is the median number of hours per day that 700 people who I surveyed said they spend clarifying information that they've received. So this could be clarifying customer requirements that could have or should have been clear to begin with. It might be clarifying incoming work from an upstream supplier internally. It might be clarifying a direction you've been given. It might be clarifying who you should go to for what. It might be clarifying what a particular metric really means. It could be any amount of clarification. So what we don't want to suggest that you should never clarify. No. Clarification is a good thing. But what we want to do is reduce the need to clarify when it could have been clear to begin with, so that we increase the bandwidth to work on the clarification that is truly needed. So when you think about the input information that everyone receives in a whole system of work being done, there's an awful lot of opportunities to clarify input that's being received all the way from a customer, whether internal or external, and then all the way through a process chain. The clarity of input that someone receives in order to do their work can often be pretty low. And then again, the clarity of final output going back to your customer can also sometimes be, pretty filled with ambiguity, and then it creates a lot of customer feeling ill at ease and needing to come back and do rework and clarify things and all of that. So some of you are probably familiar. I'm going to go ahead for a slide and then I'm going to come back for a minute. Some of you are probably familiar with the metric that I absolutely adore called percent complete and accurate, and it was developed by Drew Locker and Bo Keat back in the mid-2000s as a office and service equivalent to what manufacturing uses, which they call first pass yield. So that's measuring defects in a process. Well, we've got defects in office and service as well, and it's the defects in information. So percent complete and accurate is the percentage of time a downstream customer receives inputs, and they can do their work just as is without having to correct, add, or clarify information. So this is when they get information and they're having to correct it or add missing information that the upstream customer should have supplied or clarify information that could have or should have been clear. These are the things that start creating a lot of dissatisfaction in the workplace. It's frustrating to think that you could have gotten clearer information and not get it. And what happens is we sometimes just shrug our shoulders and throw our hands up in the air and say, well, that's just the way it is. I can't get Betty Sue to give me what I need, and so I'm never going to get it. This is the power of putting cross-functional teams together to make improvements, because oftentimes Betty Sue has had no idea that she's not providing clear information to her to her customer internally, and oftentimes it is as easy as Betty Sue saying, sure, I can do that, and it's done in a matter of minutes. The conversation was never had. It was never done in a safe environment to allow the truth to come out, and Betty Sue is fully cooperative. Now, that's not always the way, but it's very much the way that it can happen. So when you go back now to this previous slide, and you start looking at the clarity of input, when you measure percent CNA, so in this case, process 1 is passing information to process 2. So process 2, whoever's working that, or step 2 if you take it down to a micro level, they're determining what percentage of the time they can do their work without having to do any 3 of those types of rework: correct, add, or clarify. Excuse me. And much of the time it's 50% or more that they have to do rework. So then you can have that conversation. Even if it's a subjective metric, it is nevertheless directionally correct, and it's accurate even if it's not precise, but it's all you need to start putting measures in place. Now, from a customer perspective, then that clarity does have to, in fact, be a process issue where you're providing a easier means for the customer to provide clear requirements or clear order or clear request. So it's a matter of us internally helping that external customer be more successful in asking for whatever it is they're asking for. So this metric, if you start using percent CNA at a value stream mapping level, at a process level mapping level, or even in conversation with upstream and downstream suppliers, you will find that clarity becomes very easier to achieve than you would ever think. And of these 3 types of rework, clarification is by far the largest in most organizations. Now, the next thing is, speaking of maps, most processes in most organizations are still not well documented. So here we are decades and decades and decades after we started learning about process documentation and process measurement and process management, and yet organizations still by and large don't have well documented processes. If they're documented at all, they're typically extremely out of date. It's what people should have been doing back when the processes were written, not what they are doing. And in many cases, it's just a bunch of words on a piece of paper. It's not visual. There are no metrics around it. So we have a long way to go to get processes clearly documented, to get the level of clarity that a worker needs to be successful doing his or her job. And what we do usually in organizations, we blame people. We actually blame them for not doing their job when in fact they haven't been given the proper tools to do it. So we need to start moving away from that and getting clarity around what every single step someone should do is a means to do that. So we've got a lot of work ahead. Pick your key processes and get going. Get these processes documented with metrics and key performance indicators. So let's talk about that. I would recommend that you go through your work environment, wherever it is, or your, if you're an internal improvement professional, wherever your domain of influence is, and identify 5 key processes. Just start with 5. And take all 5 of them and work them through a major process improvement effort where you're able to get very clearly documented processes and identify 2 to 5 key performance indicators on how you're going to monitor those processes on a regular basis. So these are not necessarily the same metrics you use when you're mapping. It's not necessarily process time, lead time, and percent complete and accurate, which are the key metrics that we use to make improvement. Key performance indicators could be hold time for a phone bank, or it could be dropped calls, or it could be errors in a purchase order that's sent out. It could be any number of things, but you need 2 to 5 of those, and they have to be measured continually. Someone needs to be charged with doing that. You can't you can't set up a process with this expectation that's going to self-manage. Processes do not self-manage. Most of you are probably familiar with entropy. Anything when left alone will devolve into chaos. So you have to put some effort into managing that process and getting clarity around how that process should perform in order to be able to get excellence and become an outstanding organization. Next thing is clarity of visuals, clarity of performance on an ongoing and overall basis. So visual management becomes a means to gain clarity. And the point I want to make about this slide is that this happens to be a privately held company, and clarity and transparency are closely related. So here's a privately held company, most of which never, ever, ever show financials. And this is a flat screen TV that is right inside the door when you walk into this company. So, pretty much anyone can see how they're performing. They're not hiding any of those numbers. Now, I'm not suggesting that everyone should do this, but it is a great example about having clarity where every employee knows exactly how the business is performing and where they're on track and where they're not. So you're far more likely to get alignment around how people are rallying and less resistance to change because everyone understands the why behind decisions that are being made. If we don't give them this kind of information, then sometimes decisions make no sense, then you get a lot of resistance, and then those of you who lead improvement get the brunt of that. And so it all starts with clarity. Clarity greatly reduces resistance to change. Now, going to the Gemba, closely related to visuals, is another clarity boosting activity, behavior. And this happens to be a client where a senior VP has really embraced this very fully and is going to the Gemba on a very regular basis. And most leaders are not at all accustomed with going to the Gemba, and when they start doing it, they get really pretty much, not addicted in a bad way, but they get kind of addicted to it because it's transformative. To get out of your office and to go and sit with people who are actually doing the work and talking with them and hearing about their challenges, this is where real transformation starts coming in. So I think every single one of you on the phone right now or on the computer should pick a leader that you're going to go and talk with and sell them on the value of going to the Gemba. And your sales pitch will need to vary depending on the leader. But you'll need to be able to help them understand why it's so important. And then I recommend you take them actually to the Gemba with you and have them experience going out and seeing where the work is done. I'm not suggesting you need to do a full-blown undercover boss scenario, but leaders really do get excited about this when they are exposed to it. So I'm going to give you a little more scoop about what this woman said after she started going to the Gemba. She talked about it being highly humbling and that she didn't realize how much she was assuming she should have all the answers, and then she was giving people all the answers, which in many cases weren't the right answers, and it robbed the person of being involved with problem solving. And so she saw it as a means of disrespect, which it is. It's a subtle means, but it's nevertheless a means of disrespect to tell someone what to do and rob them of the ability to problem solve on their own. And she was also talking about how fulfilling it was to see the frontline employees light up when they were engaged in problem solving and when they were asked for their opinions. And it can't be, it can't be empty words. I mean, if a leader is going to go out there and they ask for employees' opinions and feedback, then they have to actually take action based on it. So you do have to do a little upfront work with some and some coaching upfront with leaders. But she went on and on about how embarrassing it was, to learn about the amount of rework that was being done that, she really didn't realize because, and this is true of all leaders. I mean, this woman is not alone at all. Most leaders have not had this transformative experience, and they need to. So she refers to going to the Gemba as a two-way superhighway of learning, which I think is a great way to view it. So grab a leader, coach them, and get them out there. All right, next thing, problem solving. So I don't know how many of you on the line are, fully entrenched in PDCA or PDSA or DMAIC, teaching everyone in the organization, and that is I believe our greatest mission as improvement professionals is to teach others how to solve problems like we do. I also don't know how many of you are engaged with either A3 or A3 management or Toyota Kata style problem solving, but this is something where every single person in the organization needs to get involved with. And it all starts with helping them learn how to get clarity around the problem they're trying to solve. So getting people comfortable about using the P word, as I call it, problem, because sometimes organizations don't like to use that word, but if you don't use it, you'll never get a sense of urgency around what needs to happen. And then getting people trained up and have them experience getting clarity around a problem, which is the first step. So this is a 12-step model that I've put together to break down PD and what I'm calling now PDSA, plan, do, study, adjust cycle. These are the 12 steps if you break it into its component parts that it takes. And the very first 2 steps are around clarification. Defining the problem and breaking it down and grasping the current condition can take an extended amount of time to get fully clear on that. And as many of you know, but if you aren't familiar with this, there's a lot of reading you could be and should be doing around problem solving. If you don't stop and slow the process to the point where you don't allow people to go forward until they get extremely clear, then you will always have sloppy problem solving and sloppy countermeasures put in place and then sloppy results. So it all starts with this upfront clarification piece. Now, if you are engaged with A3 management, then I hope you're also using the full management package, which is the vital role of the coach and the mentor. So a lot of organizations get excited about A3, but they get very hung up on the report. And it's all about producing the report. But that's not at all the thing that you should be focused on. It's really all about a coach who's highly seasoned and skilled in problem solving, coaching the problem owner and helping them learn how to become a masterful problem solver. So it's the coaching piece of it that is vital. If you don't have seasoned people internally that can be effective coaches, then you need an outsider to come in and teach them how to be good coaches, and then you can move on. And then the other thing I'd like to suggest is that in learning, you can't be a coach until you're highly proficient yourself in whatever it is. So everyone who's going to serve as a coach and are coaching problem solvers are going to have to go through a round of improvement of their own and development of their own in order to get to that coaching level. So if you see here this series of steps, so it goes from general awareness about a topic all the way up through master status, you wouldn't start coaching until you get pretty darn close to master status. Now you could begin coaching somewhere in this between beginning and advanced skill development, because when you start coaching, one of the beautiful things about coaching, as with any teaching, you learn what you don't know, and you get better at, and you'll learn more through teaching others how to do something. So what I see happening a lot that worries me is I see people that are all the way down here trying to teach others, and they're not really proficient enough to be doing that themselves. There's an awful lot of development that needs to go on, and I understand that the economy has made budgets very tight, but when I have people in workshops and the types of questions they're asking and knowing what their role is in the organization, it concerns me greatly that people are out there leading improvement that really aren't fully developed themselves. And finally, let's talk about language for a moment. If you're leading an improvement activity, and even if you're a leader having a staff meeting, I think one of the things you can do tomorrow or this afternoon, for some of you where it's still morning, is start questioning words that aren't precise and ask people to define those words. And little by little, you'll start shifting the habit from using these vague, fuzzy words into more precise words, which will move you along the improvement and decision-making front far more quickly. So, for example, when I'm with improvement teams, it happened last week about 50 times. I'll ask a question where I'm asking for some sort of quantification, and I'll get back the answer a lot, a few, a little bit, fast. These numbers, there's no numbers around them. It's just a qualitative answer. So then, of course, what I say is, well, what does that mean? Like, how fast is fast? Well, I'm not sure. And so little by little, by the end of the week, people, not only did they not answer with a qualitative answer, they actually answered with something quantitative, but they started understanding that you really can't even start talking about improvement until you get that level of clarity around the current state. So again, this is one of those things where by just kind of forcing the conversation in a gentle, professional way to demand that of people and demand that people give more specific answers, then you're starting to shift the culture. So I would far rather behaviorally shift a culture than talking about shifting a culture. It just doesn't work, in my opinion. You can talk about culture all you want, but until people start behaving fundamentally differently, culture is not going to shift, and an organization will not transform as fast. So that is a really high level and fast overview of some of the areas of clarity. There's certainly a lot more in a book than what I can cover in a 1-hour workshop or a webinar, but I hope I've given you a couple little tidbits that you can take right away and start getting clarity into your organization, because when you get that level of clarity, it's the most foundational piece for being able to then get focused on what you're going to work on and stick to it, and then have discipline around the way you do everything in the organization. And with those three together, then that's when you get great engagement of the workforce. And when you have an engaged workforce, of course, the sky's the limit on what an organization can do performance-wise. So it all starts with clarity, and then from there you can build. So I see a fair number of questions coming in. Let's go ahead and take those questions. And if you're going to log off, if you would please exit, instead of exiting your browser, exit the webinar by File and End Webinar, so that you can get the questions at the end about what you thought about this brief session. I'd really appreciate that. All right, so let's go ahead and start with the questions. Let's see. Okay. So please go ahead and type in your questions, and if there's one of those topics I didn't cover that you'd like to hear a little more about, it looks like we've got a decent amount of time. I could actually give you a little bit of content on some of the other clarity categories that I didn't get to. All right, first question is, can percent CNA be substituted by implementing Visual Factory, including control samples for visual comparison? No, not substituted. In addition to, yes. So let's talk about those two different things. So percent CNA is a metric that you're using to actually measure process performance. So at each step of the process, as work is being handed from one person to the next, the person who's receiving it is determining what percentage of the time they can do what they need to do without having to correct, add, or clarify information. And clarifying is the largest part of that. So you're getting a number that you're using, and then across an entire process, you can take every step where you get that number for each step and you multiply those all together, and at the very end you get an effective what's called a rolled first pass yield. That's the total quality of information look for the whole process. And that number in the office and service arena can often be abysmal. I mean, I've actually seen it be 0% a fair amount of the time, because somewhere in the process there's 0% of the time the person can do their work without having to clarify in the current state. And then, 5, 10, 15% is quite common. So it's a metric. Now, you can improve that metric by having visuals, because people do get more clear. And say a visual control, if there's a visual control that's passed from one person to another before they do their work, that could help them clarify what it is that they're doing. But visual management is certainly going to improve those numbers, but it's not the number, if you know what I mean. Hopefully that's clear. Let me know if you need any more clarification around that. Okay, next question. What is your recommendation for getting data to define your problem that does not exist currently? You are handed an improvement project, but no data exists to clarify it. Is a week sampling enough? Okay, well, so I'm wondering, let me see here. Okay, so I'm not sure how to pronounce your name, so I'm not going to say it because I don't want to not say it right, but I'm wondering if you would be open to unmuting yourself, or if I could unmute you so that we could talk directly. So if you are willing to do that, raise your hand, please, and I'm going to unmute you. But in the meantime, I'll start answering your question, because it'd be great if we could have a little dialogue around this. So first of all, a week sampling. Oh, good, you're willing to do it. Okay, hang on. Let me unmute you, and let's see if we could do this voice-to-voice. Oh, you need to put your audio pin in. Okay, so hang on. I think there should be an audio pin. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, how do you pronounce your first name?
Andrew.
Oh, Andrew. It says V-E-N-Y-S on here.
Yeah, it wouldn't let me in, so I used my boss's email. She's sitting right here with me.
Okay. Well, hi, Andrew. Now that one I can handle.
Man, you must be struggling with the last name, but then I forgot I used her name. Sorry.
Prestige. I can do that one. So hi, welcome. Thank you for letting me unmute you. Okay, so the first thing I'll mention is the amount of time you need to sample depends on the volume. So if you have an extremely high volume process, then a day's worth of data might be enough. In fact, sometimes a couple of hours of data is enough. If you've got a very low volume process, sometimes you need to do sampling for a couple of months if it's that low volume. So it really does depend quite a bit. Now, when you say that there's no data currently, can you tell me a little bit about this process?
So we typically get projects of we need to improve patient charges by X%.
Okay.
But when we go to understand what the problem with patient charges are, we don't currently have any data that defines how percent and complete and accurate and defect ratio. We have gut opinions from the managers and the frontline folks, but there isn't a metric that's been recorded in the past, historical, that says, on this date I entered 100 charges and 75% of them were correct. We don't track that currently, and a lot of our projects we get handed down are kind of like that, where we have a lot of information in our IT systems, but translating that into something that you can use for improvement work as far as defects, errors.
Right.
We don't actually capture that kind of information historically in the past.
Okay, so I have a lot of different things to say. I'll try to do this very quickly. One thing is that I think our jobs as improvement professionals, one of our jobs is to coach leaders, and a lot of people are real uncomfortable with that at first. So when you get, quote, handed down a project, if you can, it's best to go back to the executive sponsor or whoever handed it down and have a conversation so you can get clear on why this is an urgent project that's even, getting the time of day. And so one thing, for example, I'd be wondering, when they say that you need to improve patient charges, what data is there to suggest that patient charges are a problem? And much of the time, leaders do have an answer for that. They just haven't communicated that.
sometimes we have a problem with preconceived solutions in search of problems.
Yeah.
So we may be, I don't know if we're unique, but that sometimes.
No, you're definitely not unique. But I do believe that most leaders, and I work with leaders a lot, they often have some data that they just aren't sharing that lead them to say, we need to fix this. So I would definitely go back and see if you can find out what the genesis of this particular project was, why it's an issue, because my big question is, well, are the charges too high, too low, are they missing? What kind of problem is it? Let alone why is it? Can you go back to them?
Getting to that level of it gets handed down from a senior VP to a VP to get back to where the original emphasis or the genesis is sometimes a little difficult.
You know what, though? If you don't get clarity around that, you're likely not going to deliver what the senior VP wanted, and then, that'll be even a worse situation.
So, no, I really resonated with your slides earlier of clarify and nail what is the problem. So, no, I was just curious if you had suggestions on in a pinch. No, I totally agree of go and push as far as up the chain we can.
Yeah, you've got to get clarity. And you know what? The senior VP will so appreciate that. So again, we need to become really good coaches, because if the VP doesn't feel comfortable going back and asking the senior VP for whatever reason, that's not acceptable. That VP has to be coached to feel comfortable going back to the senior VP. And then the senior VP, I mean, most leaders are actually pretty reasonable people. Even though they seem like they're not at times, they're pretty smart. They got there for a reason, and most leaders are thankful to be guided into knowing what they need to give people so that they could be successful.
No, thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks so much for letting me unmute you. I appreciate that.
No problem.
Bye, Andrew. All right, Ethel, I see your hand up. I'm going to try to unmute you and assume that you wanted to be unmuted, so let me give it a shot. Ethel, are you there? Ethel? Okay, maybe you're not wanting to have your hand up. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and mute you again. All right, let's go back to questions. There's a few more that have come in. Let's see. I don't know if this is a question, but I'll go ahead and read it anyway. Awesome webinar! Thank you very much, David. I wish I had heard this information about an hour before it started, because I spent 45 minutes with an employee trying to resolve a flow of information in the office. Thankfully, I had a lot of these tools from past webinars on my own study of the Toyota Way. Thank you again. You are most welcome. Thank you, David. That's very kind. I'm glad it could be of help. Okay, another question. What is the benchmark value one should try to achieve for percent CNA? Ooh, good question, and one that I'm passionate about. All right, so you're going to hear my little thing about benchmarks. So I don't believe in benchmarks in this way. So hear me out. If you're looking to see what other people do and looking what quote normal performance is for a process, I think that's the wrong question to be asking. What you want to do is look at where you're currently performing and decide where you should be performing. In other words, what does the customer expect? And now everyone will say, well, of course, they expect 100%. Whether it's an internal customer or an external customer, they expect 100%. Well, if you have a human, based process, that's unlikely you're going to get 100% of anything. Machines can barely pull it off, let alone people. So it's very likely that you're going to need to go from, in some cases, it may be that you've got percent complete and accurate at only 10%. And going to 50% is a huge success. Rome wasn't built in a day. It takes time to get numbers up, and it takes a lot of discipline and a relentless pursuit of perfection in order to move those numbers up. So I would recommend you start first with what's the right thing to do, and then look at where you currently are, set your target condition based on that clear understanding of what you are and what the root causes are, and then achieve that and forget about benchmarks. Forget about them. You want to, the best person in the industry is someone that's just waiting to be leapfrogged over. So you don't want to be always striving to perform like someone else. I hope that helps. Okay, another question. Since this is the first time, oh, this is an ongoing question to the previous one. Since this is the first time it'll be measured, what should be the realistic goal to get buy-in from the team and management support, hence the question. So again, what's the right number? If it's an external customer receiving something, then it depends on what the thing is. If it's medication, then 100% of the time it should be complete and accurate. If it's a very complicated report and you have one typo in it, that probably doesn't matter. So it really depends on if you want me to unmute you, I can unmute you and you can give me a little more information about the process, the specific process. But I guess my other concern is you said to get buy-in from the team and management support. So why are they not already bought in? I mean, before you attempt any improvement, you really should have buy-in from the people that are involved, or it'll just be an uphill battle. So I'm not sure where you are in the process. Okay, I'm going to unmute you, and I see it's 12 o'clock. So if those of you that are on want to stay on, I will go ahead and answer this question because he does want to be unmuted, and we'll take it. We'll take one more question. Go a little bit be over 12 o'clock. So hang on one second. Hi, is it pronounced Ashok?
Yes, Karen.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing fine, thank you.
Okay, great. So what is the type of process you're talking about?
Okay, let me first state that your webinars are pretty awesome and gives me all the time challenges to work on.
Oh,
and,
thank you.
Processes that I work on right now are more manufacturing related.
Okay, that's all right.
But the culture and the data that we have is so poor that there is a metric, but that metric means nothing when you actually talk about bottom line financial savings.
Okay.
And our new management team is more looking for bottom line financial savings. So measurement becomes a critical part.
Okay.
And every time we need to start something, we have to put out a goal first before we, so that's the reason, like in value add, non-value add efficiency ratio on a VSM, benchmark is 15% world class, and if you are showing yourself at 36%, that means measurement is not right.
So who set the 15%?
You have to correct your measurement.
So I have a question. Who set the 15% target?
No, I'm saying the benchmark for percent efficiency in a value stream map is considered to be 15% best in the industry.
Okay,
is that
so your
statement, or is that just my understanding?
I have no idea. It depends on the industry, depends on the product. I would say that that's I would say that you can't make a blanket statement about 15% being best in class unless you're specific about a specific product, a specific industry, all that stuff. So, but I also am not so sure that you should be striving for the benchmark. I mean, my suggestion would be that you strive for beyond the benchmark and become the new benchmark, as it were. So, but
okay.
Anyway, let's go back to your question. So, percent complete and accurate.
Right. This would be the first time we'll be measuring, and I don't think anybody in the management understands what that is. This relates to more people type of activity that they're understanding, they are clarified about what is expected to be delivered. We typically look at good bad situation, good bad part, or what's the percent yield recovery that we got on a weight basis, which we don't typically measure, we calculate only. So bringing this up to the management, saying this is what our new metric is going to be, whether it is team or management, how do I get them to buy in to begin with before we start doing anything?
Okay, so I just want to clarify something. Are you talking about the 15%? And because in manufacturing, I usually refer to that as first pass yield. So is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
And you're at 36% right now?
No, that was just a number to have a conversation against.
Okay. Well, I think you can set a target up front, but I think it's far more effective to set a target after you have a little more clarity around the current state, because what you don't want to do is set a target that's 3 years off. You want to set, it's like saying I'm going to lose 20 pounds in 2 years. It's far more effective to say I'm going to lose 2 pounds every week and a half, you know, and then eventually get to my 20 pounds. So I would make sure that you don't have an unrealistic goal that's too far out. And then I also would make sure that you don't sell yourself short by having too low of a target because you're actually better in the current state than maybe you think you are. So I'm between in the steps of the process, I lean a little more towards setting the target after you have at least some clarity around the current state to know kind of where you're at, and then set the target from there.
That makes sense, because even whether you do DMAIC or PDCA, you have a number, but you want to verify your measurements
right
before you can validate your goals are correct or not. So that would make sense.
Yeah, so if you're at 30% defects right now, 36% using your fake number, if you're at 36%, you know, if you're going to try to do more micro improvements, it might be getting it from 36% to 20% or 25% even in a shorter amount of time, and then working it again from 25% to 18% or 20%, and then working it again. I mean, that's the beauty of, and that's what continuous improvement really is about going after it and then setting a new target and then a new target and then a new target, and just continuing to chip away at waste and at problems, you know, until you're performing so brilliantly that everyone's looking at you like, how the heck did you do that?
Okay, that
sound
makes
good?
sense.
Okay,
yes.
Excellent. Well, good question. Thank you. Good luck. All right, Thanks. I think I'm going to mute you again, and I think I'm going to wrap up here. So thank you so much, everyone. I hope that you're able to come to the next webinar on focus. This is one of my passion areas too, is how can organizations, entire organizations, all the way down to how can you as a person get better focus and use that to perform far more effectively and become outstanding. So until then, thanks so much. Feel free to tell your friends about these webinars, and have a great day. Lean on. Bye-bye.